You don't break a system like Karthos Relay with guns. You erase the idea that it ever belonged to its masters in the first place, and that was the part no one in the outer sectors understood until it had already happened, because for years Karthos had been more than just a station. It was a machine of quiet suffering, a marketplace hidden behind layers of deniability where lives were catalogued, traded, and erased. And like all such places, it survived not because it was strong, but because it was ignored by those powerful enough to end it, until one cycle, without warning, without declaration, something shifted deep inside its core networks, something so subtle that even the station's own monitoring systems logged it as routine maintenance traffic, a simple handshake request originating from a distant human relay node, harmless, expected, forgettable, except it wasn't, because that single request carried with it a cascade of intent, and within milliseconds it began spreading through the system, not aggressively, not like an attack, but like understanding itself, taking shape, mapping architecture, tracing command hierarchies, identifying redundancies, learning every weakness and every strength, and then, once it knew enough, it did something no one anticipated. It asked for permission in ways the system was designed to grant, exploiting legacy protocols, outdated trust chains, administrative ghosts left behind by careless designers, and just like that, piece by piece, control began to shift, unnoticed at first, permissions altered by fractions, command pathways rerouted, fail-safes rewritten to serve a different authority, until by the time the operators noticed a delay in response times, a flicker in system feedback, it was already too late, because at the heart of Karthos Relay, in the central command nexus where decisions had once been made without consequence, a team from Earth had already arrived, not with weapons drawn but with datapads in hand, not soldiers but systems architects, legal enforcement coordinators, and infrastructure specialists, people trained not to destroy but to take over, and they moved with a precision that made resistance irrelevant, their presence announced not by alarms but by results, as consoles began responding to their inputs, as locked systems opened at their command, as the very logic of the station bent to a new governance model that the original operators neither understood nor could counter, and then, quietly, without spectacle, the first cell door unlocked, no explosion, no forced breach, just a soft mechanical release as the containment field dissolved into nothing, and inside, the detainee didn't move, because why would they? Nothing like this had ever happened before. Hope had long since been trained out of them, and yet there stood a human on the other side, calm, composed, voice steady as they spoke words that sounded unreal, even as they echoed through the corridor. You are free to leave, and at first, no one believed it. Some thought it was a test, others a cruel trick, a setup for punishment, but when nothing followed, no guards, no alarms, no violence, the idea began to spread, slowly at first, then faster, like a whisper turning into a wave, and across Karthos Relay, doors began to open, hundreds, then thousands, each one releasing someone who had forgotten what freedom felt like, while in another part of the station, panic was taking hold, because the operators, the ones who had built their wealth and power on the backs of those imprisoned, were discovering that their systems no longer obeyed them, override codes failed, access privileges were denied, backup systems locked them out instead of restoring control, and communication channels began to collapse one by one, until they were left isolated within their own command hub, surrounded by screens that no longer answered to them. And then the message arrived, not from a fleet, not from a commander, but from the station itself, or rather, from what it had become, a new governance interface replacing the old, displaying a statement so clear it left no room for interpretation. All entities associated with unlawful detention, trafficking, and exploitation were now under investigation. All assets frozen, all operations suspended, compliance required, enforcement pending, and in that moment, the operators understood something far worse than defeat. They were no longer in control of the system that defined their power, they were subject to it, and unlike them, this system did not negotiate, it did not fear, it did not hesitate. Their accounts were locked with absolute precision, financial pathways traced and severed, external contacts flagged and monitored, escape routes quietly closed before anyone could even attempt to use them, and there was no dramatic confrontation, no final battle, just the slow, suffocating realization that they had become exactly what they had once controlled, contained, processed, inevitable casualties of a system that now served a different purpose, while beyond the command hub, transformation spread through the station at an almost impossible pace. Safe zones established in former holding areas, medical teams deployed to treat injuries long ignored, identification systems working tirelessly to match faces with lost records, to restore names that had been replaced with numbers, transport networks reactivated to carry the freed to wherever they wished to go, some returning home, others stepping into uncertain futures, and for those with nowhere left, humanity offered relocation, support, something unheard of in places like Karthos, choice. And if you're listening to this and you're the kind of person who loves stories where humanity flips the script on the galaxy, make sure you subscribe to Coming the HFY, because what happened here is only the beginning, and as days passed, Karthos Relay was officially reclassified, its old designation erased, its purpose rewritten, no longer a hidden market of suffering but a reclamation hub, a place dedicated to undoing the damage it had once enabled, while far beyond its walls, the consequences of its fall rippled outward. Networks that had once operated in secrecy began to collapse as data recovered from Karthos was distributed across multiple jurisdictions, triggering coordinated legal actions that dismantled entire chains of exploitation, exposing allies who had believed themselves untouchable, forcing markets to shift, alliances to fracture, and for the first time in a long time, those who operated in the shadows began to feel something unfamiliar, uncertainty, because humanity had demonstrated a form of power that didn't rely on brute force, that didn't announce itself with fleets or weapons, but instead worked quietly, methodically, reshaping systems from within until there was nothing left to resist, and that was what made it terrifying, because you couldn't see it coming until it was already finished. You couldn't fight it because it didn't give you something to fight, and in the aftermath, as the last detainees left Karthos Relay and the last of its former operators were processed through the very legal frameworks they had once ignored, one truth became impossible to deny. Humanity didn't just oppose injustice, they redefined the environment it existed in, and once they did, the old rules stopped applying, the ground shifted, and those who had built their empires on exploitation found themselves standing on nothing at all, because in the end, the most dangerous weapon humanity possessed wasn't their ships or their soldiers, it was their ability to understand a system completely and then change it so thoroughly that the people who once controlled it no longer had a place within it. And somewhere out there, in another hidden station, another marketplace built on the same fragile assumptions, someone is staring at their console right now, watching a routine system update scroll across the screen, and for the first time, they're wondering if it's already over.